Greetings from the still white hills of South Dakota. Stan Gibilisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations at your service with a little design for you. Something that you may have heard about in you may have read about it in an advertisement. I think one popular company actually advertises something like this. I've read articles about them. It's kind of a tricky term because it's almost an oxymoron. Portable ground. Well, you might think, what in the world is that? I mean, how can you have a portable ground? In particular, we're talking about a portable radio frequency ground. Now, you may remember that if you have a vertical antenna or any other kind of unbalanced antenna for that matter, and you feed the thing with coaxial cable, as you would normally do with an unbalanced system, you're going to want to connect that shield of that cable at the feed point of the antenna to a substantial radio frequency ground. Now that can consist of the actual ground itself, but unless you have very good ground conductivity at your QTH, it's going to require the addition of several radial wires going out in various directions, preferably at least 1/4 of a wavelength long. And if you make them exactly 1/4 of a wavelength long and you have enough of them, you can elevate this whole antenna system above the ground so that these radials are just in free space. And then you have what is known as a ground plane antenna. But the important thing is that these radials right here serve to provide an RF ground, and they would serve that purpose even in outer space. Even if you were floating on a spaceship, you could build an antenna, a ground plane antenna, and would in effect be a dipole, sort of twisted and contorted, out of shape. But the point is that at the feed point here, if you have 1/4 wavelength, at least 1/4 wavelength radial way out in space, you're going to get the equivalent of a portable RF ground. It's really going to work like that. Now, if you're doing this on 10 or 15 or 20 meters, not such a big deal. But if you're doing it on another band where the wavelength is a lot longer, say 80 or 160 meters, these radials are going to be long. And a portable ground is going to be long, and it's not really going to be that portable, and it's only going to work best if you can get it out in a free space location. So it's probably going to be kind of hard to do that, say if you're in a hotel or a condominium or some other limited space. But what you can do in a case like that, let's just redraw this whole antenna. Now this can be a vertical, it can be a random wire, it can be a kite sloper, a balloon sloper, anything like that that you may desire, fed with coaxial cable. And once again, you need some kind of an RF ground connected to the shield of that cable. Well, you can shorten the radial wire considerably. You can shorten it by means of an inductor, just as you would do with with the antenna itself. Suppose you had a 1/4 wavelength vertical antenna. That means an electrical 1/4 wavelength. If it's shorter than a physical 1/4 wavelength, then what you can do in there is install an inductor to shorten it physically but keep it at 1/4 of a wavelength electrically, and theoretically there's no limit to how far you can take that. Same thing with a portable ground like this. You could make this thing only a couple of feet long on 160 meters, for example, and if you had a big enough inductor right here, you could make that thing act as an electrical 1/4 of a wavelength. So you could just hang it over your deck, be a couple of feet long, big old inductor in there, and you've got yourself a portable RF ground. Now you may think, oh, this this scheme can't possibly work because the radiation resistance will be so low as to preclude effective functioning. But there's an important thing here, an important point. Radiation resistance, normally symboled R sub R, is an impediment to radiation from an antenna like this, like a quarter wavelength vertical. It's actually an impediment to the radiation because it degrades the efficiency. But in the case of a portable RF ground, the exact opposite is the case. Because you don't really want your ground to radiate, do you? So if you make it shorter and shorter and make the radiation resistance lower and lower, it's going to radiate less and less. The trick is that this inductance, the value L here of this inductance, has to become very large indeed in order to make it function effectively at a long wavelength like 160 meters if the not radiating, the RF ground itself is very short. But you can make large inductors. You can get, for example, even something that you might find in an old flea market. It's not exactly flea sized, but you can find one. It's called a filter choke for power supplies. That may have an inductance of several henries. I remember seeing a 7 Henry filter choke. If you put a 7 Henry inductor in a wire like this on radio frequencies, you're going to be able to get away with a wire that's only a few centimeters long. And the radiation resistance will be exceptionally low, so it'll hardly radiate at all. So you'll have the perfect portable RF ground, something that's a quarter wavelength electrically and doesn't radiate. Great. That's exactly what you want a ground to do, is not to radiate. That'll let your antenna do all the radiating. So you can actually take this to the very extreme and make nothing more than a coil here. You can put nothing more than a huge inductor. You don't even need to have any wire at all because the wire would be contained in the inductor. It's just the inductor itself with the far end not connected to anything and the near end connected. Actually, I should have redrawn this a little bit differently. Just a coil connected to the shield like that, a huge choke, maybe 100 Henrys. If you could get a bunch of filter chokes and put them in series, or you could wind this whole thing on a pot core. Say 100 Henrys or something like that. Whatever it would have to be, you'd have to test it by experiment to find the self-resonant frequency of a quarter wavelength at whatever you want to do. And you could literally, with a pot core, if you're going to operate QRP, you could put that portable ground in your pocket. And you could carry around your ground with you in your front pants pocket. Don't put it in the back. Somebody might pickpocket you and steal it, because it's a valuable find, a portable RF ground. Somebody might steal it right out of your pocket if you put it where they can do it. So, don't leave those things lying out where people might recognize them and steal them, because they're a hard to come by and sought after commodity, portable RF ground. Well, hopefully you've gotten to this point in the video and withstood my yammerings, because now you will receive your reward for so doing. For having withstood my yammerings, I will inform you that this whole video is nothing more. Look at the date that it was posted. Nothing more than one big April Fool's joke. Stan Gibalisco W1GVW1 Goofy Videos. Signing off for now, saying 73, and so long.